Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell movement.
Welcome to the Powell movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and this week it's time for part 2 with recent U.S. Ski and Snowboard Hall of Fame inductee, Tina Basich. And if you enjoyed part 1, well, part 2 is more fun and more snowboarding with one badass woman. Speaking of badass women, Taylor Swift was in Seattle last weekend, and my wife and I went downtown to check out all the action, and let me tell you, it was incredible. I've never seen so many concert goers all wearing the similar uniform of glitter and sparkles. And when I say glitter and sparkles, these were classy glitter and sparkles without the clear heels. I mean, when I think about it, I recently went to the Dead Show in Boulder. And Swifties and Deadheads have so much in common if you take away the hallucinogens. Deadheads are pretty much super old Swifties, wearing the uniform of tie-dye. Both groups dance their faces off and both are super stoked to hear one-off songs in the set list. The major difference is that when you leave a Dead Show, all you see is people limping and hurting because everyone's so old and you know they're going back to their hotel rooms to ice. And I'm sure the Swifties, well, they left with pep in their step, like the Deadheads did back in the 90s and earlier. I'm so happy I went down to check out the scene because I've never seen that many strangers who seem connected have so much fun together. And I was only there for the pregame. The unfortunate thing is how the ticketing went down. To spend thousands on a 3-hour concert in the nosebleed seats is crazy. And it seems like this is the future of concerts. Either get in the lottery for face value tickets or have to pay a huge premium to see the band or artist you want to see. Needless to say, I'm going to sign up for lotteries on all the big concerts now. And if I win, maybe I'll make a little money reselling tickets. Actually, I doubt I'll do that, but it's an easy way to make money if you're okay being that person. And I'm not okay with being that person. So that was pretty cool, and what's even cooler is I get to take my son down to Seek Skate Camp this weekend. I'll interview Bobby Meeks while I'm down there, but really, I'm just so excited for my kid to have an opportunity that I didn't even know about when I was his age. If you haven't heard of Seek Skate Camp or High Cascade Snowboard Camp or Windell's, well, look them up online, and if you have kids, give them the gift of camp. It is life-changing, and they will think about their summer and think about what you did for them forever. So that's life for me right now. Actually, I could go on, but I'm going to save that for my next intro, as right now I want to ask you to do some things for me. First, I'd like you to share my social post, then tell your friends about this podcast. It really does help things grow. Most importantly, I want you to support my amazing sponsors, as they really do make the show happen. I only work with the best, and they are Stanley, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Best Day Brewing, Rollerblade, and Elan Skis. Now, it's time for part 2 with Tina Basich. Last year, you were inducted into the U.S. Ski and Snowboard Hall of Fame. When you get nominated for the Hall of Fame, is it a big deal? Is it like, okay, cool, what an honor this is? Or is it more like, I didn't even know there was a Hall of Fame in Ishkamig, Michigan?
It was a little bit of both. Mostly it was like, there's a Hall of Fame. And then I was like, wait, there's a Hall of Fame? Like, that's how it kind of trickled down into the realness of what that actually meant. It was a wow in the beginning. And then by the end of going through that ceremony and getting that recognition, I was just beyond honored, and just a highlight of my career 20 years after I stopped competing and doing all of those things. So it was such a process, and to find out that Shannon and I were nominated together was just added a layer of excitement to it, and being alongside of Terry Kidwell in that nomination, and then to find out that all three of us made it was a really big deal. The Hall of Fame has existed for years, like 60 years or something, as the Ski Hall of Fame. And in 2007, they decided to include snowboarding and make it the Ski and Snowboarding Hall of Fame. And so since then, they have nominated very few snowboarders. So this was kind of a big deal to have three at once. Craig Kelly and Tom Sims and Jake Burton, people like that have been nominated in so far. So this was a really big deal for me, and I really took it seriously. It was a lot of preparation, and we did quite a few Zoom calls. I got a phone call that I had made it, that I was going to be inducted, and that was a memorable phone call. And what they asked of us was to prepare a speech between 3 and 7 minutes, something like that. And they said, don't worry about repeating your resume or the highlights of your career, because we will do that in a video and somebody will speak about you for about 3 minutes prior and then have a 3-minute video. So we really want you to just focus on explaining and sharing what snowboarding has meant to you. And I just held on to that question for a while before I started writing down my thoughts about what it really meant. And it was such a trip down memory lane in reflection to what I have done with my snowboarding career. And it started out not even being a real thing. It was just snowboarding. It was a fad. Nobody thought it'd be around. And then it became an Olympic sport and pushing women's equipment and becoming part of women's sports history through that process blew my mind. And so it took me about 4 months to really prepare what I was going to say in my 3 minutes, which of course ended up being 10 minutes.
Right.
There was a lot to say, so I really had to narrow it down because I could have stood up there and just thanked people for 10 minutes. I could have just talked about being a female. I could have just talked about a evolving, growing new sport. Like there was just so many elements of it that were meaningful to me. And there's a room full of people and all my peers and family. And I was the last person to speak. So it was a long wait to get up there on the microphone. So it was a big deal. It was a really big deal. And I was just completely honored. And the Hall of Fame is awesome in how they made us feel. And we just felt like rock stars for that weekend that we were all in Big Sky together. It was awesome.
Yeah, I would say while a lot of the snowboarding community hasn't been around a lot of these Hall of Fame dinners, and actually I don't get to go to them at all anymore because I MC an event for Shane McConkey that night every year, it seems like. But I did go a couple times before McConkey passed, and it is so incredible how important it is to each athlete. Like hearing your answer there and how important it was to you. It's one of those things where I'm glad the Hall is taking snowboarding more seriously. It's taken a long time, but shit, that's happened to snowboarding forever, it seems like, from skiers. But it's finally getting to the point where it seems like we're getting numbers of snowboarding in the mix. I know you're on a lot of the calls that I'm on, and that's pretty incredible to just have voices like yourself making a difference with the Hall. You could have gotten into the Hall of Fame just based on your 1990 season alone. You were on fire. Like you weren't just podium. You. Yeah, you weren't just podiuming. You were like,
is that a word?
Yeah, I don't even know if it's a word. But you were the U.S. halfpipe world champion in 90 and 91. You had 10 first place finishes. Did you do anything different going into that year, or did it just all come together and click for you?
I think it was the equipment and the halfpipes and all of that and the confidence, because coming from the 80s, we were riding on boards that had fins and were a tank. They were heavy, and we were allowed at Donner Ski Ranch, and we didn't bust out into a bigger mountain like Squaw Valley until I think 88. And they allowed us on like Wednesdays in April. Like it, like it was still in the infancy in my career of my story of snowboarding to when it exploded. And not until recently did I really realize that there was 20 years of snowboarding happening before I even put a snowboard on my feet. And I always think of it as like, oh, I was at the beginning because I was on those few resorts that started in those planky boards. But there was 20 years of snowboarding before me of people riding on actual 2x4s and like actual planks of wood and rubber band straps and things. So I think that when I started snowboarding was the first push to modern snowboarding. And then in the early 90s was that second push, and then it was unstoppable. And so I kind of had a glimpse of what it was before that made me recognize what it was in the 90s and how fast it was growing. Because the 20 years prior to the 80s, it grew, but not like it grew from the 80s to the 90s. Also, like in high school, I was the girl that didn't speak much. Like my best friend, Heather Mills, who was my snowboarding sidekick and just charger on the mountain with me. Sometimes she would introduce me as like, hey, this is Tina, my friend, but she doesn't talk much. And I don't remember being so quiet, but I was kind of a quiet person. And I look back and reflect on that. And once I found my confidence, and snowboarding really helped me find my voice of how to express myself, then I was an outspoken person. Then I was charging the mountain. And then I was like, not going to say no. And I was going to not take no for an answer. And I was pushing forward, and it just came through in my snowboarding. And I just owe so much to snowboarding for the person that I am, because it really did give me my voice. It gave my brother his voice, and it gave us a path that was less traveled by, which is just so our family style, the unique path to follow.
And when you think about it back then, because you kind of get into the snowboarding thing in high school and it all explodes for you. And then we talk about 1990, where you blow up and everybody in snowboarding should know who you are based on what you've done. Thinking about it, do you ever have to work a regular job? Or does snowboarding provide almost right away after high school where you don't have to get a job and you can just focus on riding?
I lived at home until I was 21. And so I started snowboarding right outside of high school, and I started traveling with the Kemper Team. And so I wasn't home much, really. I started doing the Rocky Mountain series. There was the OP Pro series. There was the series through Canada. And then we started riding up at Mount Hood in the summertime. So I was really out and about traveling as a snowboarder and as a professional snowboarder right out of high school. And so by not moving out, I didn't have any major expenses. I had a car and I had car insurance, and then I was getting my expenses paid by Kemper. So I was able to lead right into professional snowboarding as my career and as my way of making a living. And to my surprise, that lasted for like 20 years. I feel like I got so much from snowboarding. I have no regrets. I got everything out of it that I wished for or dreamed for. And when it came down to the Hall of Fame induction, it really validated all my hard work. And it also took a layer off of any doubt that I had of that I didn't do enough, or if I only would have got first at that US Open, or goals that I had that maybe I came short of, or things. It really took away, like none of those little things really mattered anymore. They didn't matter because it just validated my whole career, and nothing that I had done, no article or cover of a magazine or award had ever been given for what I had done in my whole career. So that was quite something. And it was pretty cool to be on that platform and that honor with Shannon and Terry Kidwell, because the three of us were kind of freaking out together about it. Like, it really was an emotional thing with the buildup of just a little bit of anxiety of building up and having to make a speech that represents your thanks to an honor that represented your whole career. Like, that's a big deal. And for all three of us, it was kind of an emotional release and a connection, and that bonded the three of us afterwards. And it came in waves. And I would get a phone call from Terry Kidwell like 10 days later, like, I can't believe that just happened. I didn't really recognize, like, for Terry, he was only in the first part of that era that, you know, a lot of people continued past that. And he really felt the love from the Hall of Fame and from the community of snowboarding, of just reassuring him of what a rock star he was and what an innovator he was and what a huge impact he made on the sport and the direction that it took with freestyle and things like that. Shannon and I texted her like a week before the Hall of Fame induction, and they were kind of gathering assets and photos to put up on the big screen and stuff. And Terry had texted me a picture of the Wine Rock photo, and I texted it to Shannon, and I just put bro with like a million O's. And I just stared at that photo like, here he is just charging it. And he's got no high backs. He's got like Sorels on. And I was just like, that was what was happening before I even picked up a snowboard. Like, he was a huge part of it. So I'm just so thankful for the career that I've had, and so thankful that not that it's all over, but the end cap of this Hall of Fame coming through, it was pretty incredible. I'm just so grateful.
So the beauty of it is you never really had to work a job. Snowboarding was your job. And when you're through high school, Kemper's sending you all around. And eventually Kemper moves you, or you move with Kemper almost to Utah. It's your first big move. And with snowboarding being your job, there was a phrase I used to hear a lot when I worked in the corporate world, and it was, don't shit where you eat. And when you move out of the house for the first time, you move to Utah with your boyfriend, who has the same job title as you, pro snowboarder. And while that sounds like it could be an ideal situation, why doesn't that work out?
Well, the whole Kemper team agreed to move to Utah, and the idea was to get a team house. And the Kemper team was a rowdy bunch. Like, we had a team van. We were given money for expenses and traveling. We stayed at hotels together, and there was a lot of partiers on that team. So I witnessed lots of shenanigans and ran away from the cops a couple times. Or maybe I didn't run from the cops. Everybody else did. I got stuck with the questions and answers. But it ended up being a good situation where my boyfriend and I, Andy Hetzel, got our own place, and then the rest of the team got a place. And so there was kind of a party house that got trashed, and I'm sure nobody renewed that lease, and they cut out of there unidentified because that house got totally trashed. But that was kind of the thing. Like, there was lots of trashed hotel rooms and furniture being thrown out of 5-story rooms, and like just craziness happening. And it wasn't only the Kemper team. Everybody was just raging. It was like we were all in our early 20s, and we were all being paid to be snowboarders, like lots to celebrate.
It's like you're living this stereotype.
Yeah. And so kind of the heyday of snowboarding, I would say, were those early 90s when it was just exploding, and we were just a bunch of skateboarders. And now we were in Val d'Isère, France, at a, World Cup competition with money for food and a rental car. And then 100 of our friends, the Burton team, the Sims team, the Kemper team, the GNU team, like the Avalanche people, all of those teams had snowboarders traveling the world together. So we were all in Japan one weekend, and then we were in France, and then we were in Vermont, and then we were all in Colorado. So it was just kind of a traveling celebration, really.
And recipe for disaster?
A little bit of recipe for disaster. Some people did not handle that so well, but it still was just all in joy and celebration and being together. And so I ended up staying in Utah. A few of the Kemper team stayed in Utah, but not everybody. We didn't continue with the team house or anything like that. And I soon switched sponsors and kind of just moved forward with different opportunities and things. But I always had a house in Utah. I felt very lucky to buy my first condo in Utah. It was $38,000, and that served me well. And I got a little more prize money saved up and moved up to a house. And that was the house that Adam Yauch lived with me as a roommate, and Dave Downing. And the houses in Utah all have 7 bedrooms. So we kind of took up 3 of them in the upstairs, and then there's a whole finished basement and rooms to spare. So my house kind of became a place for visitors to come and go as they wish. And Justin Hosnick was always welcome with his film crew, and a lot of Canadian snowboarders would come visit, and Dogger, and even some Europeans like Daniel Frank and Ingemar Bachmann, all those guys coming through town. And it was just a fun time in our lives. And I look back and think like, oh my gosh, I had a mortgage that was $749, and I had 2 roommates and a sponsorship that paid for all my expenses on the road. Like, I was not home much, but when we were home, we were hitting the powder. If it was good in Utah, we were home and we were competing. And that's kind of when I was starting to focus on half pipe and letting go of the racing and all the other events, and just kind of started to focus, and snowboarding started taking its shape at that point, mid-90s.
It's time for my first sponsor break, and I'm going to start things out with Peter Glenn Ski and Sports. It's summertime, which means if you live on this planet, it's hotter than ever, and that means it's time to get in the water. And Peter Glenn is the one-stop shop for all of your needs. Think wakeboard, water ski, kneeboard, tubes, swimwear. They have everything to make your summer more fun and functional. And they're a Rollerblade brand dealer, so you can take care of your inline needs as well. Peter Glenn has all the brands, all the products, a knowledgeable staff to help you, and a best-in-class website if you can't make it to their stores. But that's not all. They also have a low price guarantee, free shipping on orders of $50 or more, and a hassle-free return policy, which is very important. Peter Glenn isn't one of those big guys trying to take over an industry. They're the mom and pop shop that you've trusted for almost 70 years. If you like this podcast and want it to keep going, please buy from Peter Glenn Ski and Sports. To find out more, head on over to peterglenn.com. My next sponsor is Rollerblade, the brand that invented inline skates. Rollerblade has been keeping skiers in shape since 1980. If you've listened to this podcast and my interviews with U.S. ski teamers, all of them use Rollerblade branded skates to get where they are today. It's the only all-season sport that mimics the motion of skiing and utilizes the same muscle groups. So really, it's a no-brainer that if you want to get better on your skis, in the park or at speed or anywhere really, inline skating is going to make you better. Remember, running wrecks your knees, and biking is proven not to get your legs in ski shape. If you want to start ski season like you left off last year, download yourself Rollerblade's award-winning Skate to Ski app, pick yourself up a pair of skates, and get to work. You can thank me in early December when you're surprised your ski legs are that strong. To find out more about all things Rollerblade, head on over to rollerblade.com. My final sponsor this round is Stanley, the iconic Northwest brand that invented the category of keeping things hot and cold over 100 years ago. You remember Stanley from your grandfather's green thermos that kept his coffee hot forever when he took you out on adventures. Well, Stanley still makes that bottle and so much more. Think tumblers, water bottles, barware, camping utensils, coolers, vacuum bottles. There really is something for everyone over at Stanley, and you aren't going to find them overpriced like a lot of copycat designer brands that have popped up recently. Stanley is the originator, and they pride themselves on providing you with the best products at the best value. And that value gets even better when you shop with my discount code. When you head on over to stanley1913.com, go shopping. When you check out, enter the code pmovement, that's all one word, all lowercase, and you're going to get 30% off your entire order. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. When we talk about contests, one of the most important contests of the 19s was the US Open. It was like the epicenter of snowboarding, and people have described that on the podcast before. You know, it's a Burton event. It's founded by a skier who turned into a snowboard inventor. And did snowboarders ever hold that against Jake, that he was once a skier?
No, I never felt that. I just noticed it in the brands that they had. You know, the East Coast was harder snow. There was more people trying to grab an edge. So there was a little bit more of the hard boot racing people on that side of the coast, and maybe influenced because maybe snowboarding came from skiing over there, from a little bit of crossover. And the West Coast, you know, was Tom Sims, who was a free surfer and kind of wanderer and cruising for waves and crossed over mentality. And so a lot of the snowboarders on the West Coast were skateboarders or surfers. And so those two things would come together at the US Open, and really it wasn't a conflict. I would look at the racers and be like, why would they waste their time on that board? This one's so much more fun.
Right.
You get to go in the air and you get to go backwards. And, you know, they would try and come right down the pipe and just rail the whole thing. So at that point, I just was so in love with the freestyle part of snowboarding that I wouldn't understand why anybody would waste their time carving only. But that's how it divided the people that felt that same feeling on a carving board and felt the speed under their feet and the thrill of winning and being timed. You know, being timed is a perfect way to stack yourself against others, where being judged in a pipe is a little bit here and there. Maybe somebody deserved more, somebody deserved less, you know, that kind of thing can happen. So a lot of people like the structure of racing and would go in that direction. But I don't remember any tension. There was always competition with the women, especially. Like, it was just such a different thing than what I knew from my competitive gymnastic days of pretty hardcore competitive spirit, and snowboarding was different. The girls were always gathered at the top of the half pipes, high-fiving and hugging each other and cheering each other on, even though inside we were like, okay, I'm going to try my best. I'm going to try to win. But there was always just such a good vibe amongst the girls. And I think that's why I could stay in it. If I joined snowboarding now, where it was Olympics and people were training, and it just isn't my style. That's why I got out of gymnastics competitively. And I assure you that I would not have been so involved in the competition scene had it been 20 years later that I started snowboarding. So it really was a perfect time and a perfect chapter for me to be involved. And I'm so grateful for that chapter because it was a perfect fit for me.
So you've got two factions of snowboarding, it seems like. You've got the Burton side of it on the East Coast that's got more of a race focus. You've got the sim side of it on the West Coast that's got more of that skate style. There's other brands out there as well that kind of gravitate each way, I'm sure. But then you think about the ski brands that get into it. I know K2 got into snowboarding in like 87. Was there any respect for the ski brands making snowboards, or was it more like they were just trying to take your money?
Well, some of the snowboarders took their money. So we were happy about it. Like it was interesting to be, because we would all go to the trade shows in Las Vegas and the SIA shows, and we would be there. And in the beginning, it was big Burton booth and the Sims booth and a big Kemper booth and GNU and Airwalk and DC and brands like that. And we would be there to kind of cruise around. We'd sometimes be there to try and get new sponsors. We'd be there to be at the parties that the Wu-Tang Clan would be playing or whatever was happening. And it was kind of part of the scenes. That's where photographers would bring photos and kind of try and pitch it to companies. So things like that were happening. And then when the ski brands started popping up with snowboards, here's the ski brands that originated that trade show. And then they see the snowboard brands coming in, and that's the busiest part of the show. All the hype. If you can picture it, it was kind of like Suits before. And then here comes these punk rock snowboarders grabbing the attention and the energy at the shows. And so they wanted to know what was going on. They wanted to tap into that a little bit. And you saw skiing clothing change, a little more street style, things like that. You saw skis being invented with flipped up back tips to go backwards. They really were influenced by snowboarders.
Snowboarding saved skiing.
You could say so. And so along with that was them trying to get a piece of snowboarding, because here we are maybe taking some of the money off the table from them. And so there was companies like K2 and Solomon, and Michelle Taggart rode for Solomon, made big bucks for a long time. Like there was some money to be made and they wanted a piece of it. So they were going to have to buy into it. So from the core of snowboarding, those brands were probably not given the respect as like Burton or Sims or GNU, things like that came from more of a core part of snowboarding. But that was a time when snowboarding was growing and families started snowboarding. And this is mid-90s. Resorts are now allowing snowboarding. And so the mainstream audience was buying a K2 board. They maybe didn't even know the difference between that and a Burton snowboard, of where it came from or what it represented. They just wanted to be part of the wave of what this new thing was, snowboarding, and what's all the hype about. And I tell you, the second you put a snowboard on and fly down an untracked snow, you're hooked. It's not like everybody was in it for the fashion or the fad. The feeling of snowboarding is something real that made people quit their day jobs and snowboard and wash dishes at night to be able to ride, or work at the resort to get a season pass, or skip school, or whatever it was. It's a real thing. Like people really fall in love with snowboarding, and it's the feeling that it brings them and the joy it brings them and the thrill.
And the sport back then is kind of changing a bit. There's a lot of different things going on. There was the half pipe contest, like you said, but then there was different things going on. Alaska was starting to fire at that point, and it was like the Wild West in Alaska. I think you'd pay like $25 for a heli bump. They'd give you a token and they'd take you up to the top or something like that. And I think you went out there first for the King of the Hill contest, but you've been to Alaska a shit ton. Like, how many heli days in your career do you think you've had in Alaska?
Oh gosh, I have no idea. Probably 100.
Jesus.
I don't know, maybe 50. I have no idea, but we probably went up there for 12 years straight, and we would stay for weeks at a time.
How intimidating is that when you first go, when you're like a half pipe pretty much jock at that point? You get off the plane in Alaska and you look up and you're like, wait, we're going to ride that?
Actually, Utah is what prepared me for Alaska, because Utah was unlike Tahoe. We could hike anywhere in Utah.
Okay.
In Tahoe, you had to stay on the resorts. In Utah, you could park on the side of the street up in the canyon and hike out of your door of your car and hike straight up, and you would not get kicked out. You would not get your car towed. You would not get a ticket. So that backcountry experience of Utah completely prepared me as much as it could for Alaska. So when I show up in Alaska, it was for the King of the Hill competition. And that competition was on one mountain. So guides had checked out the conditions. Guides had marked off if there was any, gaping holes or crevasses, glacier openings, things like that. So they had picked a fairly safe, controlled mountain to do that on. And I remember coming down on that run and I was ripping powder, and then all of a sudden I'm in the just chop of like some old avalanche or something, because I remember falling, completely wiping out like 100 feet from the finish line, and I still got second place. I would have been in pretty good contention for a first place there if I wouldn't have fallen, but I was just trying to haul ass. And those conditions were rough and really woke me up to what could be in Alaska. Those were longer runs than I'd ever taken. So we were riding fresh powder at the top and then corny snow at the bottom. And stepping up to Alaska when you're in a helicopter and you get to point to where you want to go is a whole other game. And that you really have to be trusting in your crew that you're with. I was always with Justin Hostenick and Bill filming us, and a crew that I trusted. And that just is a necessity because, there were times when I would be at the top of the mountain and Axel Poporte would drop in and trigger some snow. So I would have to go on a different run that I was planning on. And then all of a sudden I triggered the snow and stopped and got out of the way. And then I had to come down a whole different way of the mountain that I hadn't seen yet. And what I mean by seen yet is that the helicopter flies you around, but you can't memorize the whole mountain. So we're taking Polaroids and viewpoints that we can identify with to get down safely. We had avalanche plans. If it triggers, here's your outs. And all of that came into play on some of those runs. So you have to trust your crew to come save you, to guide you down by walkie-talkie, like things like that. So people have the misjudgment where they're like, oh my gosh, Alaska, it's like the longest powder run of your life. That must be so thrilling. And I'm like, it is, but you're pretty much gripped the whole time. Like, it's not like riding powder at a ski resort where you've taken that run a million times and then all of a sudden there's 3 feet of powder and your favorite part of that run, and you drop in and you're like freaking out and screaming and you hear people from the lift and everybody's hollering and throwing high fives at the bottom. Like a high five at the bottom of a run in Alaska is like, oh my God, I'm alive. High fives. You're going down, you're just kind of gripped. You're looking around, you're waiting for movement in the mountain. You're waiting to make sure you took the right run. Like, how fast do I go? Like, things like that are pretty intense. So Alaska's a whole other ball game. And there was one day where I came in from Japan straight into Alaska because it was going to clear. And so instead of going home and then going up to Alaska, I went straight to Alaska, and I show up in Alaska and hop on a heli pretty much the next morning. And my first or second run, the mountain slides, I'm freaked out, but we're, 11 miles into the mountains. I'm not going to go, I can ride the helicopter the rest of the day, or I can ride a snowboard the rest of the day. Those are my two choices. So I kind of got my senses back and my confidence back and got dropped off on the next run, and they let me go first. And it was a first descent. And I remember just telling myself as I'm trying to pump myself up for this run that, okay, I'm going to just haul ass. I'm going to go as fast as I can so that if anything breaks, I'm going to be so far in front of it. I'm going to just outrun this thing because there's no out on this run. And I had never gone faster on my snowboard than that run. And I remember Justin developing the film from the footage later because all the other guys dropped in after me and they're like, we had to check the film speed because you were going like twice as fast as everybody else. And it's in my part in absent films and the transcendence. And I'm just hauling ass. And I remember the turns had to have been like 100 feet long, each one of them, maybe longer. And instead of just looking ahead to my next turn, I had to look ahead to the next turn after that to make sure I wasn't going to run off a cliff because I had so much speed following the momentum of myself flying down that mountain was insane.
So that's some of Alaska. I'm going to take you back to traditional contests, and you're doing so well, you earn yourself a spot on the World Cup, which means you get to travel the world a whole lot. What are World Cup events like? Is it more structured and more ski-like?
It was kind of structured. I kind of think of that time in snowboarding when the half pipe and the World Cups were happening. And it was also a time where had focused in the group of snowboarders. So all of us would show up like it was Michelle Taggart and Shannon Dunn and Barrett Christie and some of the Europeans and Tara Eberhard and the top girls from each of the teams. And we would go through these competitions. And I think that's when the pipe dragons were kind of on the scene. So things started to get consistent and the tricks started forming. And I feel like when the X Games launched and some of us started going for the big air route, and then that's when the Olympics had started and some of us were going towards that the gang kind of got broken up a little bit. Like the family that was from 90 to 96 was the same family of snowboarders traveling the world on the World Cup and doing all these events together from Europe to Japan to all through the US and Canada and going to Mount Hood all summer long. We were all training to be the best half-pipe riders we could be. And then all these different events, it kind of started to spread out. And I stopped competing in half-pipe and started doing the X Games and big air and fell in love with Alaska and started doing backcountry filming and focusing on that. And so I wasn't riding with Shannon as much because she went kind of for the Olympic route and was still competing in half-pipe. And so a lot of stuff kind of shifted right there. Everybody started to part out in what their specialty was.
So you end up hitting the World Cup. We're not going to talk really about the World Cup that much, but I will say there was one nightmare story I had read in your book somewhere. I can't really remember the details, but I have it in my notes that I need to ask you about the elevator story. What happened with that one?
Shannon and I just told that story the other day. We were in Europe and staying at a hotel, and usually when you were at a World Cup competition at a mountain in Europe, everybody ended up staying at the same 3 hotels. Like everybody wanted to be on the mountain so that we would get to our contest on time. We were in town at this, little ski town up on the mountain range. And so we had the half pipe competition and everybody's still in town and everybody would go out partying after the contest. And we get back to our hotel, which had like a 4-person elevator. And for some reason, like 10 of us shove ourselves into the elevator. And then I'm pretty sure it was Daniel Frank's fault. I'm going to blame him. I just remember he was there and maybe Sabu on the Burton team and maybe Brian Iguchi. I don't remember, but everybody started jumping up and down and we actually broke the elevator and it just fell and stopped.
Like dropped like 10 feet or something?
Like dropped and stopped. And so we're like, stop jumping. And Shannon and I are freaking out and it broke. And I don't remember how many hours we were stuck in the elevator, but we couldn't get it open. And they finally figured out that we were stuck in there. And when they pried those doors open, they were screaming at us in German, like hothead German innkeeper screaming at us. And then back then, sometimes you would have to turn in your passport to check into a hotel. So they had our passports and we couldn't check out until we paid for the elevator. And they had repair people there within hours. And they said, I think it was like $4,000 or $2,000 or something.
Whoa.
And we got everybody together tried to track down everybody that was in that elevator to help pay for it. And somehow I think Shannon and I and a couple people had to split it because people bowed out. But it was probably right after they got out of that elevator, they went, grabbed the fire extinguisher and sprayed everybody in the hallway.
That sums up snowboarding at the time?
just shenanigans, just total nonstop shenanigans.
It's time for my second sponsor break, and I'm going to start things off with Elan Skis. I started telling you about Elan building a cult following in the States about 3 years ago. And if you're like me and heading to the mountain on a weekly basis, I know you've been seeing more Elans by the day. Why? Because they'll make you a better skier. The product that Elan puts into the market is second to none. I mean, Elan's a company that also makes luxury yachts, so you know they're not going to cut corners on materials or production. They're built in Elan's proprietary factory, one of the most sustainable in the world, and the difference in quality is noticeable. Walk up to any ski wall and compare the craftsmanship of an Elan ski to the rest, and there's a difference that you will see and feel. But when you get them on the snow, that's where Elan really shines. From my ripstick models to my new favorite twin tip, the Playmaker, Elan keeps making better and more fun skis every year. If you want to have more fun on the mountain next year, head on over to elanskis.com and find the pair that's best for you. My final sponsor is Best Day Brewing. And I'll tell you, I've been loving having Best Day as a sponsor, as it's really helped me change my ways. See, I'm a binge drinker. While I don't drink that often, when I do, I put a bunch back. And my issue is that, like with everything, I drink way too fast, and within a couple of hours, I need to go home because the alcohol has gotten the best of me. But not anymore. Now I'm managing my fun time by making sure that every other beer I drink a Best Day. And by doing that, I've been having my best days and nights ever. I can stay out longer, I'm coherent, happy, and I don't feel like crap in the morning. And they taste so good. I'll put a Best Day Hazy IPA up against any alcoholic IPA in a blind taste test, and you won't be able to tell which is which. On top of that, Best Days are only like 60 calories, which, like drinking less alcohol, is something that I think about these days. While I'm not asking you to quit drinking by any means, please support me and your health by heading over to bestdaybrewing.com and order a six-pack or two. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. How about summer snowboarding? I'm going to guess that you've done it all. South America, Australia, Hood, New Zealand, Whistler. What's your favorite?
I pretty much had amazing experiences in Chile and in New Zealand. And by amazing, I mean riding powder in the fall with a sunset that blows your mind. Like just moments like that, riding snow like that. And Mount Hood represented so much of the scene because everybody was there. But when we do trips to New Zealand or to South America, down to Chile, things like that, like that was our snowboard team or a trans world photo shoot or a feature article that they were going to do, like things like that. So that would be a smaller crew of like 5 snowboarders. And so there's many stories from New Zealand of where we went hellying all day. And then at the end, my brother like tipped the lady who was the pilot of our helicopter that day $100, and she strapped him to the bottom of her helicopter with a rope and a harness and went and took him. And we have pictures of my brother hanging 100 feet below this helicopter, and she's swinging him around.
Crazy.
And then she goes and dunks him in the lake. I think those in like Queenstown or somewhere. And so like stories like that of like just make it so much more of a memory. And I remember being in Chile on a photo shoot with John Kelly and some of the Sims team and just being insane sunsets every night because there was so much smog over Santiago that it would just burn red.
It's incredible. I've been there. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just incredible. And we would be riding powder and jumping cliffs. And then, you know, back home, everybody's riding corn snow up at Hood. But the Mount Hood scene was so much fun too, because we were all there as coaches or guest coaches, and Mount Hood always represented like trying to learn new tricks for the next season. Like that's where I learned my 720, and I was rotating 360s off of backcountry kickers, and I was over rotating and I couldn't land in powder backwards. So I thought I better just rotate it around twice. And so I attempted that a little bit, maybe came 540 a couple times and crashed in the backcountry. So when I got to Mount Hood that summer, must have been the summer of 97, and I was riding for Sims, and I was hanging out with Mark Frank a bunch and the Sims team up there. And Marco was the one that kind of had ridden with me in the backcountry. And I said, hey, I want to kind of stay after hours and hit this jump without anybody around. And so the lifts would close at 2:00 and then everybody just snowboard to the parking lot after. So you could stay and ride for a little bit if you wanted to and wrap it up. And so Marco and I hiked this jump and I just started trying to spin 720s and I was so black and blue. I got my board around a couple times. I never landed it up at Mount Hood trying it. And so going into that next competition series, there was an airwalk. It was a contest at Aspen Mountain in Colorado, and they didn't allow snowboarding on the mountain, but they had a snowboard contest for some reason. And it was at the bottom of the run, and we had to hike. They wouldn't let us on the ski lift, so they weren't running the lifts at night, and they made us hike up to the top of the jump, and it was a big air jump, but it was not very big. I mean, big for that time, but it wasn't a huge, X Games kicker. It was this kind of a smaller event. And so I said to myself, I'm like, okay, I got to try my 720 here because this is the competition before the X Games. I kind of have to know if I'm going to try it at the X Games or not. And so I went for it and I kind of drug it around and slid out the landing and made it. And it was a big deal. That was kind of the first time that I pulled it off. And I won that competition. And so leading into the X Games, I knew I was going to try it. And that 1998 X Games at Crested Butte, it was a big jump. During practice, I only spun 360. I told myself I had this little thing where I would stand at the top of the jump. They would call my name, racer ready or whatever, go ahead and go, Tina. And then I would take 3 breaths and then drop in. And so I told myself that I had 3 jumps and I was going to try the first 2. We're going to try for the 720. And I pulled it off and I halfway surprised myself. Thank goodness there was enough air time for me to get my board around and open up for the landing and kind of drug out the landing. But that was a big moment for me, a big moment for women in snowboarding to pull off that trick at that contest that had never been done in competition in front of an audience like the X Games and the televised coverage reached out to a huge audience. And so that was really one of the biggest moments of my career of landing that trick and winning that competition.
I mean, that was so big, and it's so funny if you think about it, because like the progression of snowboarding has gotten so much further, but what you did then in 98, that 7, it was like time stood still right there. Everyone was just like jaw dropped, like, holy shit, the sport just leveled up on the women's side right here. I can't believe what I'm just witnessing. And it keeps going, which is pretty incredible. You got a little bit ahead of where I was going. We were talking about summer snowboarding, and one place that you do summer snowboarding is in Australia. And when you're in Australia, there's a famous story about you going snowboarding. You kind of split off from your crew, and you're just riding with some random dude you meet on the mountain. Then you go in for lunch, and you're talking to your crew, and you're like, yeah, I'm just shredding with this dude. You hear a rumor that there's some famous guy on the mountain. And can you tell the rest of that story?
Yes, that was something else. We were with the Kemper Team in Australia. I think we were at Threadbow, and there was not much snow, but we were snowboarding, and it was late summer. And so we were stoked to be in winter time. And I had taken these runs with this guy, and I came in for lunch, and they said, hey, Adam Yauch from the Beastie Boys is here. He has green hair. We have to find him and get him to come snowboard with us this winter. And so when I went back out for lunch, I found the guy that I had been riding with earlier, because the guys were kind of off doing like tree jibs and stuff that I wasn't into, and I couldn't keep up with them. And so I was kind of solo riding, and I met up with this guy. And so we continued to ride. And it's so funny to me because we had conversations on every lift ride, but never did it come up like, what do you do for a living? Oh, I'm a rapper. Like that never came up. So at the end of the day, he kind of took his hat off and he had green hair. And then I just put it together. I'm like, oh my gosh, you're in the Beastie Boys. And he's like, yeah, that's what I do. And I'm on break from touring, and we're kind of in between albums, and I'm heading to Whistler this winter to snowboard. And I'm like, well, you got to come through Utah on your way up there, because we've got it going on. We've got a pretty cool scene going on out there, and you're welcome to come stay. And, back then it's not like text messaging or, instant messaging anybody. So it was like, here's my phone number. And he called and said, I'm going to come through Utah. And he pretty much came through and then never left. He asked if he could rent a room for me and his management company arranged for automatic checks to be delivered to me each month for $400. And he bought an old beat up Subaru, and it was just like regular roommate life with him. And, you know, he would be playing his upright bass he had taken out there. And he was just kind of a normal person. And I had never seen the Beastie Boys live. Of course, I had worn out my cassette tape of the Beastie Boys, and I loved their music. But my life living with Adam was just different. It was about snowboarding, and just, you know, random things would come in the mail of cassette tapes with new beats on it that somebody had sent him, and new sound for the next album. And they needed illustrators because they were starting to think of artwork for upcoming things. You know, stuff like that would come through. And at the same time, I'm building my graphics for my next pro model, and I'm getting things in the mail of samples as well. And, you know, so we're just doing our thing. And he just loved snowboarding. He fit in with the Utah crew, and everybody there just loved him. And we have such fond memories and so grateful for that time in our lives. The Utah crew holds on to those memories because we don't have him here anymore. You know, I miss him and think of him often when I went and visited Utah after many years to do my Bombhole podcast. I rode the tram up at Snowboard and just really sent some energy his way.
I could ask you about the Bombhole and Eastone not being there anymore, but I will just say that, and people can figure out their own shit there. It's kind of weird. But either way, the Beastie Boys put out albums. You put out pro models. We talked about you and Shannon Dunn putting out the first 2 women's pro models. Then you guys went on to do Prom and Tuesday. But you guys put out your pro models. And then just like that, after they launch, it's like both of you leave your board sponsors. Shannon heads to Burton, and that opens up a spot at Sims. Why even think about leaving Kemper, the brand that gave you your first pro model, and going to Sims?
Shannon and I talked about this a lot because Shannon was on Sims that had just done a great, huge launch and trust in her to launch a snowboard that went so well. And then she decided to go for Burton, and she had started dating Dave Downing at the time, who rode for Burton, and Burton was the top company. So I think people knew how set up you could be riding for Burton. Like, it was just smooth. There was always a bus picking you up at the Tokyo airport, and there was always a team house. They had coaches. You know, it just kind of maybe seemed just super streamlined pro or something, but there was an attraction there for Shannon. I didn't consider leaving Kemper until the spot opened up at Sims. And Kemper was, you know, in the top 3 brands there for a while, but things started to shift. And when we were at the trade shows, like, Kemper had a smaller booth at that time, and Sims had a big booth, and Burton had the biggest booth. And it was kind of like, for Shannon, moving towards an opportunity that had longevity in it. And for me, I saw it as an opportunity to jump into the company that had pushed her board in a really good way because they had been so successful. My first pro model with Kemper was not as successful as Shannon's. Not until I got onto Sims did I have a really hot selling board. And so there was something there to the business side of it that made sense, and the timing was just right. And so that shift helped my career and my snowboarding because Kemper ended up not surviving as a company. So maybe there was a little bit of that happening. I remember being at the Kemper talking to the team manager saying, hey, you got to pay us back for our expenses. And it didn't happen. And so there was kind of a signal of something starting to fall apart. And so I was grateful for that opening at Sims and that it worked out. And Shannon went and, you know, to this day is still involved with Burton, and her husband, Dave Downing, is, you know, she ended up marrying Dave, and he still works for Burton. And so that was where they were meant to be.
So you end up going to Sims, and we've talked about Galen Nagel and how important she was in snowboarding, like the things that she made happen. Another important woman in snowboarding was Monica Stewart, and she and her husband started Bonfire Clothing, which was a big deal. But the biggest impact Monica had on women was raising awareness, I feel like. And how do things go from reading an article Monica wrote in Wig magazine to creating the Boarding to Breast Cancer event?
I remember being at the ASR trade show down in San Diego, and that article had just come out about Monica's diagnosis. And I remember Lisa Hudson and Katie Peck and Kathleen Gasparini and a few of the industry girls and Gayleen had come together, and they were like, hey, this is what's happening. And everybody was just so surprised by the news, because at that point it was not something a 20-something-year-old would be dealing with. And so really, Shannon and I were the athletes kind of being involved, but it was really the industry girls that really organized that first event. And Shannon and I were kind of the poster childs of that event and promoting it and putting names, on the athlete side of it. And once that event happened and the Beastie Boys played under the name Quasar, and it just went bonkers. And we raised this money and realized that awareness was what we were doing it for, because Monica had passed before that event even happened. Yeah. And so her impact of waking up the industry to the facts about breast cancer and how it can affect any of us, that push and that group of women who, in that snowboarding industry, like the women really stuck together. We were in a men's world. So we really came together not only for like Shannon and I pushing our riding and pushing for women's equipment and all these things, but we also pushed for each other. So it was natural that we wanted to come together in some way in Monica's honor. And so Boarding for Breast Cancer was born. It did become its own nonprofit, which kind of meant that we were on our own mission to figure out what we represented, and what we wanted to do was raise awareness amongst younger people and youth. And so it was a perfect fit, because we were in the snowboarding industry and we had connections to the skateboard industry and the surfing industry and the X Games events and things where we could reach people of those ages to give the warning that breast cancer is a possibility for anybody, and that we need to do self-breast exams and wellness checks and be aware of what we're looking for and live a healthy lifestyle. And so it's really the thing I'm most proud of. One of the things that came from snowboarding that is still to this day raising awareness, and Lisa Hudson still leading the pack, and she lost her mom to breast cancer. We have Megan Pischke, who has always been a part of Boarding for Breast Cancer and is part of the team. And she went through breast cancer, and just so many pro snowboarders have been affected by it. And so it just is so important that it's still going. And I'm just so thankful for all the industry support, because that's how we get funded and sponsored and get to the next event. And it's unbelievable that it's impacted so many people. I mean, even my best friend, Angela Dominguez Morgan from high school, found a lump because she was looking for one, and she knew what it felt like because she had been to one of our Skate the Lake events. So things like that, where you're like, wow, I'm not just doing this for others. This actually may have saved my best friend's life. So I'm always open for the effort it takes and the hard work it takes to get to those events and help promote that message of early detection.
Well, it's had a huge impact, and like you said, it could be the most important thing you've done with your whole career, and you've done so many important things, but it really impacts a lot of people's lives, a lot more than just snowboarding does, which is pretty incredible, and you were able to do that through snowboarding. So back to your career, I feel like one day you have an epiphany and you realize that you're done riding halfpipe. Like, you want to just ride powder and maybe film, and do you call your sponsors and let them know that you're done riding pipe? Or is it just something that you just decide and that's how you're going to move forward?
Well, it's not such an easy decision. And I think only if you're an athlete do you understand how hard it is to decide on your own where your path of your career is going. Because we didn't have sports agents and, people really guiding us. Like today, people might be like, hey, we're going to go for freestyle focus or extreme or doing stunts, and we're going to market you as a risk taker and go on shows like this. And a strategic plan was not in place. It wasn't like that. And so for me, I felt that I couldn't be a snowboarder forever. And I wanted to take every opportunity that came. So it naturally, I had won lots of halfpipe competitions. And then here's the X Game presenting big air. And then I'm going to jump onto that. And then I'm all of a sudden have more time in my winter and being invited to go to Alaska. And I'm living in Utah in the powder fields of Utah and start filming and doing backcountry. And really, like, my body has taken a lot of wear and tear and crashing off big air jumps. So when you go get to huck a kicker in the backcountry in Utah and land in 5 feet of powder, like, that's a little softer on your body. So
Yep.
I was attracted to that as the years go by. It was just a little more forgiving on my body. And really, it's such a thrill. No higher do you get than flying down a mountain of powder. Like, it's a bigger thrill for me than coming down a half pipe.
When you describe the feeling of snowboarding, I don't think about somebody going down a half pipe and catching air. I think about someone riding 2 feet of powder and feeling like they're floating.
Yeah, it's the dream-like mindset that snowboarding puts you in of like, is this really happening? Am I really feeling this? And just the stoke is just at an all-time high. And the feeling it brings you is unlike anything really, because it's your own abilities that you're trusting and you're leaning into Mother Nature and trying to balance that risk and reward of safety. And so when it all comes together, it's just such a high. It's unlike anything. It really is addicting, not like an addiction of adrenaline. It's like a feeling of joy or some uplift for me. It's not like I risked my life and I'm a badass. Like, it's not like that. It's like it lifts you up.
Well, you can have just as much fun on low angle POW, I would think, as like steep POW. It doesn't really matter as long as you're riding POW.
As long as you're riding fast. I just like to ride fast and push that snow up in the air because it feels like you're in the clouds. Like when you kick up snow in Utah and you're hauling ass down a hill, that snow lingers and it's just floating everywhere. You know, it starts sparkling in front of you and the lights coming in and out of these powder turns, and that's just all part of it as well. So it's a pretty magical thing. It's a magical feeling.
And so with your snowboarding, you were like the queen of big air for a while. Then you transition into filming. I think you did Full Moon. You filmed with Justin for a bunch of absinthe stuff. And I think one of the cooler things that happens towards the tail end of your career is your first video game. With video games, are opportunities like that a huge payday, or is it more just really cool to have?
Well, that was Lisa Hudson hitting the video game industry. And she brought the whole idea of putting an athlete in a video game in action sports. This is before Tony Hawk skateboard game launched.
So she's the mastermind.
Yeah, she planted that seed of putting a pro athlete snowboarder in a video game as Tina Basich, where if you're playing the video game, you can select to be Tina Basich. You can pick the outfit that I wear. You can pick which board to wear. And as you're playing the video game, if you crash into a tree, it's my voice screaming, ah! Like I would go into voice recording booths and record all these sounds and yeah, or yeah, bro, or whatever the sounds are in the video game. Those are our voices. And so Lisa, completely coming from the snowboarding side into this mainstream video game company, comes up with this concept, which has not been done. And so that just paved the way for the skateboarding Tony Hawk game, which she also works on to this day. So she has been a big part of the video game industry, taking that shift towards having athletes in the games. And for me, it was a big payday. It was a big check, and it was, you know, PlayStation 1, and then it was PlayStation 2, and then it was Xbox, and then it, you know, so we would come in and re-record and redo our assets. Like we would have our sponsors and everybody involved in that project. So it was pretty cool to be in a video game. And I had a funny story because there was a company called EA Sports, and they had produced a snowboarding game, and they had Tiger Woods also signed up and had done a golfing game with him. And Galen Nagel had moved over to EA Sports and was managing those promotions. And she had Tiger Woods signed up to where he had one promotion per quarter or something, and she needed to use up that promotion with something, and she wanted to promote the snowboarding game, but used Tiger Woods. And so brilliantly, she had set up for a press conference for Tiger Woods and myself to be together. And I thought it was a trade show where we were going to be signing autographs. And so I got flown down to LA. They put me up at the Ritz. And the next morning I was supposed to meet at 8:30 to do this promotion. And so that's what I knew. And so I showed up and I met the lady for breakfast that was running the event or whatever. And she said, okay, so when you and Tiger, your first photo shoot today is with USA Today. I'm like, wait, what? And I said, I thought I was going to be signing autographs at the same booth as him. And she goes, no, you're doing press all day with him. You have interviews with hard copy and all these TV shows and newspapers. And I was like, I'm going to need a minute. And so I run back up to the hotel room and I grab my little camera, put some film in the camera and put on some makeup and head downstairs. And so they bring me to another hotel room suite where Tiger is going to be. And so I show up and there's Tiger Woods with his crew of his posse. And he comes straight over to me and shakes my hand. And he said, so you're the pro, huh? And I said, yep. And so we sat down within like 2 minutes. We're sitting there for the photo shoot for USA Today. They had already set it up and we were supposed to play the snowboard video game together. And they were filming us and taking photos. And I'm sitting there going, oh my God, I want to look good in my photo with Tiger Woods. And he's sitting there playing the game for real going, come on, Basich, what do you got? I'm winning. And I was like, cause you could play like head to head in the snowboarding game. And so we were laughing and then we had to pose. They wanted us to hold the video game control systems and be like nose to nose, like we're growling at each other kind of thing. And so his nose is like 2 inches from my nose and I just met him like 4 minutes ago. And I'm sitting there and I'm looking at his eyes going, and they're like taking their time setting up and they're shooting photos and whatever. And I'm sitting there going, do you know your eyes are different colors? And we're saying weird stuff to each other like that. And then I'm looking down at his like Rolex watch or whatever his watch sponsor was. And I'm like looking at my Nixon going, do you want to trade watches? You're sponsored anyways. And like things like that. And so we were like kind of goofing off and whatever. And so we did the whatever 4-hour stretch or 2-hour stretch of whatever all the interviews and we finished everything up. And then I was supposed to catch my flight out. So I went to my room and got my bag and wheeled my wheelie bag down to the lobby and EA Sports had called me a cab to go to the airport. And so here comes this like blacked out Suburban pulls up and they roll the window down and Tiger Woods was driving. He's like, we're heading to lunch. You want to go? And I always look back at this moment. I'm like, here's Tiger Woods asking me to lunch. And I'm sitting here waiting for my cab to fly back to Sacramento. But I declined the offer. I said, no, I got to catch my flight. And then he drove off. And I was like, man, I should have gone to lunch with them. They're probably cool guys, like.
He likes Waffle House.
Yeah. So I always thought that was funny that I declined the invitation and went back home, whatever I was going. Maybe I was going to Red Powder. I don't know.
Well, that's an amazing story. I was going to bring up how the video game brought you together with Dave Grohl, and we were going to talk a little bit about that. But really, there's no reason for me to talk about Dave Grohl because it's a different podcast, and he's not going to be on my podcast. What I do want to do is find out how your snowboarding career ends. Does your career wind down and you retire? Does the industry retire you? How does that happen?
So the end of an athlete's career is a really hard thing to navigate. And sometimes it's your sponsors cut you off. Sometimes there's an injury. Sometimes you're just not placing and you make your own decisions. For me, it was a little bit of being past my heyday, maybe. I had stopped competing the half pipe, I'd done the big airs and made my big push in big air, but then I had focused on backcountry and filming, and then I broke my leg. And so I broke my fib and tib in my right ankle, and I was at Mammoth when that happened. And I repaired my leg. I had surgery. I rehabbed it. I came back to snowboarding. My mindset was not the same. I did not feel confident on my snowboard. I felt breakable. And so that whole mental shift really changed things for me. I tried to get back competing and went to the world championships that Sims had put on. I think it was in 2001 or 2000. And I got second place. I did my 720 and I took off my bindings and I said, that's it. I can't compete anymore. It's not for me. The pressure's too much. And so I did start recognizing that I needed to take better care of my body. People had been injured in big ways by then in the professional snowboard world. And for me, it was a decision to take care of my body better. And what that meant is how was I going to navigate and keep my sponsors as I took on this new path as being a little bit more careful. And so what I did is that I took on broadcasting jobs with NBC. I started GKA, which was a women's action sports TV show that I was the host of. And so I was not scrambling to find other things, but trying to look for new things to do. And my sponsors did start to decline in how much money I was making from them. Like Airwalk had shifted their company to selling shoes at the mall instead of selling boots and shoes at skateboard shops. So some of the brands had taken different positions that I was sponsored by. And so it kind of naturally started to fade away. But I felt a little bit lost in that time. I was going through a breakup at that time and just kind of trying to find my feet again. And it naturally faded away. And I realized that I was ready for the next chapter, which is what I wanted, a family, and I wanted to put roots down and, have somewhat of a routine in my life. And so I was able to find that. I met my husband in 2003. So not long after did I find my way, and that was really represented my family life. And I dove into my family life wholeheartedly. I'd waited long enough for it. I was 37 when I gave birth to my daughter, and I was just so in love with her and being a mom, and snowboarding kind of fell aside. And I had had a little bit of a glimpse of that kind of early 2000s snowboarding, and it was so mainstream, and I was reporting for NBC and just not knowing anybody at the top of the half pipe anymore. And things like that were hard because the people that I had competed with, everybody didn't stay until the end, like people came and went and things were shifting in the industry and the snowboarding was getting more mainstream. And so it kind of was a perfect exit into my family life. And so for years, I didn't snowboard. I would go once a year. I was focused on raising my daughter, and my daughter was diagnosed with scoliosis when she was 10. And so she was braced and in a torso brace, which didn't allow for snowboarding. And so I really let go of snowboarding for a little bit. And it wasn't until I was offered the opportunity with Capita Snowboards to do an art board with them. And it just reminded me that I was a snowboarder and that that's part of me that will never go away. And it really lit a fire under me. And so following up with the Hall of Fame and just getting after it again, and my daughter being old enough to join me and her health being able to allow her to snowboard. And we kind of became a snowboarding family. And that was only in the last 3 years. So I've snowboarded more this last winter as a total than I have in 20 years.
Whoa.
I have more days. So I kind of got to fall in love with snowboarding again, even though that never goes away. It really was a beautiful thing. And what a crazy winter for that to happen for me because
really.
It was just powder day after powder day. And I found myself eager to be after it again. And what a come full circle to watch my daughter snowboard with me, and she joined her snowboarding team at the high school, which just blows me away that there's high school snowboarding teams and opportunities for kids to be involved like that. So watching her at her first race, cheering from the sidelines was a pretty amazing feeling as a mother, from where I started in snowboarding to then become the mother cheering from the sidelines as my daughter came down the giant slalom race.
That's
it was
awesome.
a really beautiful moment.
Well, that is the body of our podcast, and now it is time for inappropriate questions again.
All right, we got more questions.
We do. Last week I was able to get Barrett Christie, and she's an absolute legend, and she asked those questions. How do I one-up that? Well, I was able to do it. I was able to get your best friend forever from snowboarding, Shannon Dunn, to ask the inappropriate questions.
I love it.
And are you ready for question number 1 from Shannon?
Yes.
Okay, Tina, what happened on your road trip from LA to San Diego in your 62 Impala?
Oh my gosh. So that was in the mid-90s. I had saved up my prize money and bought a 1962 Chevrolet Impala convertible. So I was so hyped. I bought the thing, and the Summer X Games was going to be in San Diego at Mission Beach, I believe, and a scaffolding jump, like a fake snowboard jump where they blew ice on it. And so I thought I would just be the coolest snowboarder ever to show up in this convertible Impala. And so I hop on the road to drive it down there by myself, and the tires that were on the Impala had sat for so long because the lady that I bought it from had had it in storage, and I got 3 flat tires on the way down. Or maybe I got 2 flat tires because I finally made it there just barely in time for like practice. And I remember hiking the jump, and I did my 720 kind of in an inverted 720, which was a big deal. I got second place. There was a girl that did a big old laid out backflip and beat me. But I remember gathering up with friends, and Mark Frank and my friend Carrie were going to drive back home with me. And so now we're feeling like we're all set. And I remember Mark Frank would be in the back seat of the Impala playing Tetris on the little
Game Boy?
The little like Game Boy. And we were so addicted to that little game. We were like, ooh, I got level whatever. And then boom, 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 flat tire again. So I have these photos of Marco changing the flat tire and like the Game Boy sitting on the seat in the Impala. And so that was such an adventure getting down there and back. And I ended up getting all new tires at that point, and then driving it up to Mount Hood and cruising it around Mount Hood. And then after that, the Impala came back to Sacramento, and then it didn't leave within a 1-hour radius. It was not a road trip car. Like, what was I thinking?
All right, we're going to jump into question number 2.
Please tell the Boarding for Breast Cancer Beastie Boys house party story.
That's maybe the best story of all times. Adam Yauch was my roommate at the time, so he agreed that he could bring the band to our first Boarding for Breast Cancer event in South Lake Tahoe at Sierra. And so I was in charge of picking up the band in Sacramento. And when I picked up the band, we went to 7-Eleven to get like frozen burritos. And so they had told me on the way to 7-Eleven, like, hey, pull over, we want to get food. And so there's a 7-Eleven. We pull over, and they're like, hey, we want to play a warm-up show tonight before the event tomorrow, because they were just playing all their guitars and stuff, and they had limited equipment and whatever. And so I had my little address book, and I said, hey, I'll call Sean Palmer. He lives in South Lake Tahoe. And so I called the phone number that I had in my address book and said, hey, this is Tina. Is Sean there? And they said, no, Sean doesn't live here anymore. And so the guy on the phone, who I didn't know, I said, well, the Beastie Boys are coming up. I have them in my car, and they want to do like a house party or play at a pizza parlor. Can you help me? Do you want them to play at your house? And I had never been to the house. I didn't know if the house, how big it was or anything. And they're like, are you for real? And I said, yep, they're in the car. And they said, yes. And they said they had actually had like, I think they were already going to have a house party, or somebody in the house had some amplifiers and equipment. because they said that they were going to get it set up, and they gave me directions. So I'm sitting at the payphone writing like, turn left at this street and then turn right at this street. There was no GPS, cell phone type action back then. So we're like 2 hours from the house. We're still in Sacramento at the 7-Eleven. So between the time that I made the phone call and we turn on that last turn to get to the house, word had got out. And this is not social media word had got out. This is like call your friends on the rotary phone. Word is getting out. And we start pulling up and there's all these cars like parked in a ditch and like 5 cars in one driveway. And we're like, what is going on? Is this for us? Like, this is crazy. And we pull up to the house and the house is already packed with people. And we just roll in with the Beastie Boys and they're holding like their bass guitar in their case and their guitar. And there was a drum set already there. And they had flipped over the couches to make like a barricade for the little corner of the living room that was the stage. And we were like, holy shit, this is going down. And so Shannon and I were standing just off to the left of Mike D, and my brother had a film camera with a fisheye lens, and he stood on a stool behind the drummer, and they just rocked the house with some old punk rock stuff and like their current music, and just the house just about came down. There was people jumping off the balcony from the second floor into the living room. There was people hanging in the windows. There was just total mayhem. And my brother has a video of it on YouTube. I think if you look up on YouTube, Beastie Boys, Quasar, house party, South Lake Tahoe, it comes up. And it's just insane. And you can see Shannon and I just trying not to get squished. And Mike Diamond at the end announces the event the next day. I think he called it a pageant. He's like, everybody come to the pageant tomorrow. And he's like joking around. And then that just pretty much launched Boarding for Breast Cancer the next day. But it was just like, will go down in history as one of the best moments. I don't know of any other situation where that has happened. I'm sure they played house parties before, but for the snowboarding world, that was it.
That is an incredible experience right there. Here comes your final inappropriate question.
Let's hear about your slalom race with the pizza box story.
I know exactly what she's talking about. It was at Squaw Valley for the OP Pro competition. And this is in 1991. So this is still when I'm riding half pipe and I'm riding slalom or giant slalom. And so they had a competition of the half pipe and I had won the half pipe. So then I'm going into the next event the next day, which is the dual slalom. And I had my Kemper gear. So I had this like kind of a slalom, tighter clothes, trying to be fast type outfit on with a pizza box duct taped to our arms. And I'm up in the start gate and I'm up against for first and second place. I made it all the way to first and second place and I'm up against Lori Gibbs and she was a gnarly racer and just a kind of a gnarly chick. Like she was gutso, like go for it and just lots of power and attitude. And so she was kind of intimidating. So we're up at the start gate and she's slamming her race board down, slamming it, going, what do you got, Basich? And see what you got. And I'm sitting just shaking in my little freestyle boots going, oh my gosh, I'm going to die. So they go, racer ready, 3, 2, 1. And we punch out of the gates and I'm going down and I think she was in the lead and then she rails out. And then I'm like, oh my God, I'm winning. Oh my God, I'm winning. Oh my gosh, I'm going to win. I'm going to win. And then I won. So that was like a big deal that a freestyle snowboarder had won against a racer chick in hard boots and a race board. And I was sitting there in my Sorels, taking first place. So that was a big deal that I won both of those competitions at that OP Pro. And I got these huge cardboard checks that I kept forever.
The funniest part of that is the picture because you look like you're representing Domino's Pizza because you have big Domino's boxes on your arms and that's what you're banging gates with because it takes away some of the pain of banging the gates when you have those pizza boxes on.
Yes.
That's where it all tied together. So that's Inappropriate Questions and that's our podcast. And it's not every week that I get to speak to a Hall of Famer. And your life is so interesting because it's so different than everyone else's, it seems like. It starts out with that Waldorf private school hippie upbringing that you had, and then skate and snow is something that was almost like therapy for you and your brother and a way for you to find your tribe. And you don't just find your tribe, you become a pioneer in a new sport that may not have seemed game-changing at the time, but I think you can look back and see what you did with your life and see the big impact that you've had on so many people. And that's such a cool thing that most people can't say they've had in their life. So I thank you for what you did, and I thank you for your time here.
Thank you so much. I feel very, very fortunate and lucky, and what a blessing snowboarding is to so many.
So that was time with Tina Basich, and what incredible life she's lived, pioneering the way not just for women, but for snowboarders in general. She was there in those pivotal early days, and it's incredible to hear her well-thought-out history. And you know what? While I wanted to talk more about her and Dave Grohl, because he's a big name and talent, but he didn't fit in the story. I mean, we talked about Adam Yauch because he was a snowboarder, but that wasn't Dave. So if you're wondering why he only had a mention, it's because this is all about Tina's incredible snowboarding career, and Dave didn't fit that much into the snowboarding part. So there, I snuck him into the outro. That's the podcast. At this point, I want to ask you to rate me wherever you listen to me. Usually, you do this with stars and it takes about 10 seconds. And since I don't ask you to do much for me, this is so appreciated. What's even more appreciated is if you review me after your rating. To do that, it takes about a minute, and all you have to do is share your thoughts about the show for everybody else to read. It also helps the show jump up in that algorithm. And if I read your review on the show, you're going to win a special prize. If you hear me read that review on the podcast, all you need to do is email me with your mailing address. My email is mike@thepowellmovement.com, and I will send you something, and it's going to be awesome. You can also email this address for any potential guests you want to hear me interview, or if you have any questions or concerns. I will get back to you. Finally, as I mentioned earlier, I only work with the best brands, and I'd love for you to support them. They are Stanley, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Best Day Brewing, Rollerblade, and Elan Skis. Have a great week, everyone.